Good evening. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Fabrizio Aiello, and today I have Taylor Wentland from Red Koi joining us, and we're going to chat comics.
How's it going, man?
Pretty good. So, I've never met you before. This is the first time. So,
Would it be too abrupt to say my name is Tyler?
slow down. Slow down.
Right.
Yeah, so I figured we would just chat about how you got into comics. I'm
Sure.
always interested how people like that first comic they get. Were they a little kid? Were they older? And kind of go from there. And then from that, how you got into actually creating them, because that's another big leap.
Yeah. Some of my earliest memories of comics, I think we had a box of Pop-Tarts. And I think that Marvel had some kind of a deal with Pop-Tarts where like you could get a comic and it had like Captain America and the Hulk and maybe Spider-Man in it. But I remember like being so excited about that book and the colors and things like that. And I've been drawing ever since I was old enough ever since I could articulate a pencil. So those were some of my earlier memories. And then I think you might have mentioned in a previous talk at some point, but was it like some big box, some big department store used to have like you could buy a box of comics of like,
Sears. Yeah, the
yes,
Sears
Sears.
catalog, yeah.
You could buy a big box of comics for Christmas, and I remember I got one once, and I was just floored by that, and so that was really the main kind of driver for a long time behind wanting to learn to draw, was just loving comics, loving that you could tell stories that way. And then getting older, I definitely was a superhero, kid like most of us are, but it was really when I discovered, I think, like Hellboy. Hellboy was a major breakaway point for me where I was like, I'll go back. It was when I figured out Spawn was owned by Todd McFarlane and not sort of an entity I didn't I didn't know who was behind Marvel or DC.
Yeah.
And that really made a big impact on me because he always really uh, beat that drum about, own your character, own your IP, and make it something that you want to, make it your vision. And so that was always important. And then Hellboy was really the place where it was like breaking out of superheroes way more into the supernatural, and it was so different and so strange. And then I really got into like Craig Thompson stuff, like slice of life stuff, um the Goon, things like that. So I was really into independent stuff for a while, um but I've been drawing the whole time. And then when I got to, I think I was in my mid-20s, and I was working my day job and realizing I was just thinking about drawing comics all the time. And so I was kind of like, well, look, I need to do this. But I did a pretty honest assessment of my art, and I was like, this isn't as good as what's on the shelves. So I took a year, and I never went to art school, but I put myself through my version of art school, which was like, I was like, okay, I need to learn how to tell a story. I need to learn how to draw anatomy. I need to learn how to draw different places and different creatures. So I'm going to tell short stories in different settings. So it was like a short story of two old men playing chess in a city, city park. The guys, they hang
Yeah.
out and they play chess, stuff like that. Or like a story of a Maasai warrior hunting a lion, on the, African savannah. So that was another, and so I just kind of kept doing those little stories, and then eventually I found Alterna's If anthology, and that was like an opportunity to it was, the theme was superpowers, and so I did a retelling of Hercules' first trial against the Nemean lion, so I could kind of be guided by a traditional story, but I could do my own interpretation of it. And that was the first story that I had ever had published. And Pete recommended I try to do gray wash, which I had never done before. Um, and I enjoyed it and it stuck. And the goal after that was just to get something published every year. And it's kind of been going that way ever since.
So who is your big like artistic influence? The comic book that you hold up as sort of like the Holy Grail?
It's tough. I could tell you because I bet I've had different holy grails at different
Yeah.
in my life. So it was like
Yeah.
early on, I couldn't tell you what I couldn't tell you why I liked what I liked, but I knew when I didn't like something. And so early on, I think I know now it was like very much the Art Adams X-Men, the Art Adams Wolverine, that really incredible, over muscled, dynamic, bombastic character. And then Greg Capullo as I got older, because I was reading Spawn, but Greg Capullo stuff, it still, blows me away what he can do. But I wanted to be Greg Capullo for the longest time. And then Mike Mignola was like a violent shift in tone because it's like he was trying to strip away as much detail as he could and just reduce his stuff down to the key shapes that his characters were made of. And that's something that rings in my head now because when I'm trying to draw my characters, it's like, okay, well, what are the shapes that take me through? And I'm sure with Horace, obviously, you have that same kind of dynamic. Um, and so now maybe it's trying to find something in between. I don't know what my holy grail would be these days.
It's funny because you mentioned Mignola, and it seems like artists don't stay like in a certain phase for very long. Like Mignola, like the first Hellboy, it changes pretty drastically. Like it
Yes.
gets really flat. I mean,
Yep.
it goes. I don't know how far, but it wasn't long.
Yeah. That if you, especially I got into Hellboy after Mignola, I think had really gotten into his simpler style. So going back and rereading, I found the first volume jarring, and I still do. I have it, and I like the story, but I'm like Hellboy. You see his top teeth at certain points, and he's got abs and big shoulders. I'm like,
Yeah.
he's got to be skinnier. You got to get rid of the top teeth, and he got there, but.
So why Red Koi? Was it you were sort of did you have an idea for the story first and then you were looking for a setting, vice versa?
So at first, I had the short stories published, and then I wanted to try a crowdfunder, and so I was like, well, what kind of story do I want to write? And I kept, I came up. It was actually originally a Viking shield maiden story, and I just had a story where it's like she was returning home from a battle, and her village is, ruined. But I couldn't really get anything going from that. And so one day I was just drawing and I drew a sort of traditional looking. Um, well, I'll back up. I had read a book years ago called Yakuza Moon. It's the memoirs of a Yakuza boss's daughter, and she goes through a lot. Being affiliated with crime and stuff like that. And a cathartic part of her kind of leaving that behind was to get this big back piece in traditional Japanese irezumi of courtesan. And there's this whole legend about the courtesan. And I didn't want to draw a courtesan, but I loved the look of the cover. And so I drew a samurai. And I had read there had been female samurai and stuff like that. So I was like, okay, this is cool. But so I did this drawing of the samurai, and she was sort of embossed with a big Japanese castle behind her, and this sort of haunted more looking area. I'm a big Beowulf fan as well, so like the whole idea of like a haunted, swampy, kind of marshy place was always kind of appealing to me. And so I had this picture. I was like, well, what's in that castle, and who is she? And that's when things kind of started to go. And it was like, what kind of movie would I want to see with these characters? It was like, I want to see a dark fantasy samurai creature feature haunted house movie. It was like, I want to be able to have the supernatural elements in there. I don't want to be restricted by, say real world history. So I always describe Red Coids, it's dark fantasy with a samurai aesthetic. I'm trying to be respectful of those cultures, but I'm really just picking the toys that I want to play with and throwing them in.
Did you? I mean, were you a fan of Japanese history art prior to this, or you just had like an inkling of it, and then you like dove whenever you started to?
Um, I was I guess you could say a fan in a loose sense. I always thought it was cool. I had read the novel Shogun like 4 times, James Clavell's book, and I loved that because I loved how lived in the world was, how intricate the relationships were, how alien it was for, and I forget the protagonist's name. I think his name Blackthorn, the Englishman, to be literally dropped in this. Um, I think it's Edo period of Japanese history where there's just horrendous warfare everywhere, and to be trying to navigate an alien world. Um, and so I really like that. And this is gonna sound so lame, but do you ever play the Total War games?
No.
It's like you the original Total War games. It was like you pick a faction in Japan, and then you essentially try to conquer the island. But it's like real time battles. So you go and you direct armies, and they fight, and you need to keep going to conquer the island. And I loved that game. So that gave me an appreciation for, you know, just sort of that period and all the warfare and how their armies would clash and things like that. I don't know if I was any great tactician, but I did win the island several times. So
Well, there you go.
that counts, I think.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's funny what like little thing like sparks something. I went to a museum, I think it was in Toronto. It's been years now, but they had an exhibit of samurai like armor there.
Mm.
And up until that point, again, I thought it was cool, but I had never read a book. I think I might have seen a movie or two. It wasn't anything like on my radar. But this exhibit of samurai like armor was just fascinating to me.
Mm.
And it's like I could tell immediately as I'm walking through, I'm like, I think I'm falling in love with this thing. Now I didn't write a big story or anything like that, but it just, you just never know when that stuff is going to happen and why it happens.
Well, it's cool because then, especially with the samurai armor, because they didn't have a lot of metal to, to like knights had access to for their armor. But like you sort of, as you keep drawing it, you start to understand a little bit how it's put together, how things hook on, and like where variations might take place. So, I mean, you can get too carried away and go overboard in the details and the drawing. But I think a big mistake that some artists will make if they do a samurai book is to not give enough. Sometimes it's like you have artists, it's just like, yep, helmet down here, couple of lines, and it's like, I get that for far away shots, but you can have a lot of fun getting in there, and like there's all these like hooks here that strap here that hold the chest plate up. They also pull this back. What? Is that me?
No, what?
What's that? Oh, sorry, my music just started playing.
I didn't hear.
Oh, good. And so it's like there's so much opportunity there, but I don't think I've ever gotten to see an actual set of armor up close. But no, it's on this side. No, it's on this side. There's a pile of books up on this top shelf here. There's like 3 or 4 books all about history and with a lot of close-up shots of like the masks and things like that.
It's so otherworldly. When I think about going through the museum and checking out like the really fancy ornate Spanish armor or this or that, and then it's just so different. It's really pretty fascinating. So as a writer, I'm always interested about, like, whenever you're writing your stories and your characters, are they like didactic, or is it just entertainment, or is it both? Are you thinking in terms of that, or I want to do an important story, or I want to do, or I just want to elicit a certain effect?
With the first chapter, it was more about the story I wanted to tell, and Aiko just kind of served that guide, that kind of like, I don't know what you'd say, like she was just like the car that you're in while you're going through the ride, just so you can kind of get a sense of it. But I found that I couldn't just leave her blank canvas. I really needed to at least make her world feel lived in. So that's why I spent, when I was writing, I had to write out as much of the mythology of the world as I could, because I needed to understand what actually put her in this place to begin with,
Yeah.
you know? And it's like you find out, okay, her world has been torn apart by this war. Essentially, their god has been slain before them by this mysterious enemy who we don't understand, but apparently the dragon slew the Tiger Lord at the same time, and so you just have these two powerful forces that just came crashing down, and it's just been a free for all ever since, with the samurais vying for power, and her parents have died, and so she's a part of one of these factions, just trying to stitch their world back together, but at the same time, her foundation is gone. So I had to sort of understand what that was to get her there. And then when I got her there, I was like, okay, now we're in the house and now we can get into the monster story. But I had all this other stuff that had already been written out. I'm like, where did that come from? You know? And so it just started to take on a life of its own after that, where I had to kind of go more into those things.
I just want to say hi real quick
Oh,
to
yeah.
people in the chat. Hey Blake, how's it going? Dr. Mask, Jefferson Roswell, thanks for joining.
What's up, guys?
I was I was thinking about this recently about I'm calling it creative free will, but do we have creative free will? Like, we obviously have regular free will, but I'm convinced we don't have creative free will. No matter what we do, if you try to, put morality or whatever it is into a story, you will. If you try not to, you're going to be putting something else in there as well. So it's impossible to avoid putting morality into these stories in some way. And that's why, unfortunately, for some people that are not great people, whenever they try to write heroes and the heroes come off as villains, I'm like, well, that's because
Seems about right.
Because your morality is pretty terrible. So do you think in terms of that, like, is Aiko a moral character, or is it just sort of that? Yeah, I know it's not an actual time period, but
Well, it's because, yes, I mean, and I think you're right, because fundamentally we all have to make a value judgment. What is our category of good? What is it ground in? What is our category of bad? What is it ground in? Different cultures have come up with different answers. We as Westerners have particular answers for particular reasons. And so if you're writing a story, that's obviously going to have an effect. And so Aiko, yeah, she is. And it's strange because I think unintentionally I had very different opinions when I first started that story, and so she had a lot of potential to be a very postmodern character. It's like the tradition betrayed her. She like leaves, she rips her patches off, she like chops off her hair, and she's like about to like go into this big wide world, like, oh, I'm free of everything, I'm free of my tradition. But then in the last page, and it's funny because I couldn't have told you at the time why I did it, like the last page, you just have this like look of like uncertainty in her eyes. And I was like, and then like the koi skeleton, and I was like, I think it just looks cool. But like she goes from like feeling sort of peaceful to like this moment of like there's uncertainty there. And I was like, what was that about? And so she has, because like I said, in the story, it kind of the repercussions of the world is that for all intents and purposes, their god, which is the sea dragon Ryuchin, died. Like the core of their culture, that which was drawing them all into communion, has now fallen. So you could say that the moral criterion that was guiding their culture is done. And so immediately what happens, it's a human free-for-all. Who's the strongest? Who gets to be shogun? Who's going to conquer the rest? And so for Aiko, where the story is now and what we'll see in Red Koi 7, um, is her trying to, I guess, tap back into like what is that fundamental good. And for her, she thought that her husband, who was a fellow warrior, had been killed in a battle, years before. And she finds out he might still be alive, but in this hidden dungeon island. And so that's the one shred of hope that she has to kind of build that foundation back. And so she needs to know. And so for her, the first step towards kind of going back and rebuilding it is to try to put that together if she can. I don't know if that answers the question, but yes.
No, it does. But it is interesting how you said that you did something like the drawing, and then afterwards you go back and realize, well, that actually had meaning, for something else. I think that happens a lot.
Yeah.
It just kind of it speaks to the idea that even if we are trying to do a fun story or something that looks cool, ultimately there's something subconsciously that's pushing that to the surface, even if we're not aware of it at any given time.
Yeah. And I think if you struggle against it too much, I don't know, I think that's where maybe as a reader you're going to end up feeling put off, or maybe feel, and I don't think it's often intentional, but you might end up feeling manipulated, or you're pulled in a direction like, no, I don't think that was supposed to go that way.
Yeah. It's funny because I just finished up issue 3 of Horace, and I just was thinking about it. I'm like, it's actually kind of the hero's journey, and it was almost unintentional, and I didn't realize it until I finished the issue, starting with issue 1, 2, and 3. I'm like, wow, it really does follow it, and I was not thinking about that at all. And I wonder if I had that sort of in the forefront of my head, like I just read Joseph Campbell's Something, if I would have pushed back against it and said, well, instead of this, I will subvert expectations and do something else. So it's almost like it's good to have a foundation of stuff, whether it's philosophy, morality, all this kind of stuff, and then put that to the back of your head. So you get like an idea of it, but it's not right in the forefront.
But I think the difference between that stuff coming off well and that stuff coming off ham-fisted is if, say, you're trying to jam that philosophy, that morality, that belief into basically like a character puppet. Yeah. You know what I mean? And then parade it through, rather than if you are operating from that framework and that's just how you see the world. Like, I think that is what creates a very fun, like Geronimo's a good example. Like Rob has a very particular framework that he's looking at the world through as he's creating Blood Realm, and it creates this amazing Elseworlds tale that you feel enthralled by and enjoy, but he's not it's not puppetry. It's very, very genuine.
Yeah, it's almost like you're creating straw men in your stories on purpose. And I'm going to have this really crappy person say something that I disagree with. That way, the hero
that'll show him.
Yeah. And essentially that's what you have a lot of modern Marvel stuff. It's just a bunch of terrible straw men. It's interesting because I thought about, like, historically, there are some pretty famous stories about writers essentially. Well, I was thinking Steve Ditko and Mr. Wright. Was that his name? Do you know anything about that?
No.
So after Ditko, and I'm going to get probably some of this wrong. It's been a long time since
you could tell me anything. I'll believe it.
Read anything about it. After he left Marvel, split, I think a lot. The idea is that he was a big objectivist, so he started writing stories, and he didn't like the way that a lot of Marvel stuff were going. So he essentially created a character, Mr. Right, which was a mouthpiece for objectivism, Ayn Rand stuff. And I've never read it. I've always wanted to, though.
Were you a big Ayn Rand fan?
Was I?
Are you? Were you?
Uh, I mean, I've probably read most of everything that she's written for sure. Now, whether or not I like it all is irrelevant. I've read a lot of things.
I feel like I only know her in relation to people like saying, pointing out where they think she went wrong or didn't go. So I don't really even have a basis for Ayn Rand, but it would be interesting to read that, especially from your perspective, and see like, okay, does this come off well? Like, how was it received? Do you?
Yeah, well, it's not received well, but then again, you have like Alan Moore kind of talking about it, people that are just automatically just gonna like destroy it because of that.
Sure, yeah.
Not that I want to turn this into an Ayn Rand talk, but she's sort of just the famous example of that. Like a lot
Yeah.
of her characters are essentially puppets, and she might be Mr. A. That was it, Mr. A. Thank you,
Dr.
Dr.
Mask always coming through.
Man. Yeah, so I feel like that does happen a lot, intentionally or unintentionally, for a lot of stories when you start from that place.
Hmm. Yeah,
Um,
that's the hard part. We were talking, um, I don't know if it was last week or the week before, um, on Rob's channel, um, and we had all talked about like what are you most focused on now? Are you reading more history? Are you reading more religious stuff? Are you reading more detective stuff? Like what is it that is like your research right now? And my research, I feel like lately has been a lot of philosophy because I have, you know, the Swan King is coming to Red Koi, and so it is it's a fictional world, but it's very much an East meets West kind of thing because, you know, she's got the more of the Buddhist samurai kind of tropes going, and he has more of the Christian Latin West knight tropes going, and I want that to be something where it's like I don't want that to be the focus of the story, but I do want it to show like, well, these are different people with different cultural backgrounds. And it's not going to be the thing that throws, you know, that becomes a whole debate about East versus West. It's just
yeah,
going to be I want to show points of differentiation or points of disagreement. It's like, oh, do you think that this is strange? Well, yeah, because, you know, and so like in a Red Koi 7, there's a scene where like I have a proverb from the West and a proverb from the East, and they're great because they just show the different perspectives, I think,
hmm.
really well. So I'll be curious if readers like that. But
I mean that's classic. Just being able to juxtapose a character with somebody being different. That's
mhm.
that's a great way to carve out your character more and create new characters. What I wanted to ask was, and again, this is just from my viewpoint. Every issue that I've been doing, I always have something in mind that I want to work on or head towards.
Mhm.
So, just for example, like the last issue, I'm like, I really want to do some dense storytelling with like 12 panel pages, and I really want to play with that. Do you have
Mhm.
anything moving forward that you're like, I want to work on this. I want to play with that. Is it page layouts, anything like that?
Yeah, I'd like to get more exciting page layouts. I don't want to get confusing because I've definitely seen some cool pages that I can't make heads or tails of before. Um, but I, for so long, I've been trying to like just stay in my lane, so to speak. So it was like I wanted to stick to black and white, you know, black and white for as long as I possibly could, get as much out of black and white as I could before I ventured outside of that. And then, you know, in terms of panel layout, it's like, okay, just keep it real basic, grid structure. I'm not going to overlap panels. I'm not going to get too crazy because I really want to try and get a sense of that structure. And
Yeah.
so lately I've experimented a bit with, you know, laying over panels or staggering them, doing little things like that to make it more exciting. So I'm gonna try to push that a bit more. Um, in issue 7, I think a big thing that I'm trying to push was I just wanted some really cool villains. So I have these villains that come out. They're like these. This one's a mutated gigantic crocodile samurai, and the other's a giant mutated like Komodo dragon samurai creature, and they're all strapped out in armor. And they become like riding demon eagles in, and then you find out they're Lord Kitagawa's like science experiments. Like, so that was one thing that I was like, I just wanted some really cool like Ninja Turtle style
Yeah.
mutant monsters to just come in and smash stuff.
I mean, that sounds so much fun to draw, let alone read. I mean, that's
It was
just
a
so
lot of fun.
satisfying.
I'll be honest, it was a really, really good time when I finally got to get into that.
What is, as far as your reading, when you just mentioned a little bit ago about, what are you reading, detective stories or history? What sort of stuff are you referencing? And another thing, actually, before I forget,
Sure.
a lot of your drawings seem very detailed, like the backgrounds and stuff. Do you use photo ref? Do you ever reference comic books for like, how did Mignola handle this, or how did Wrightson handle trees? Like, what's your process for that?
Yeah, Mignola definitely for especially natural backgrounds. Like he has a great way of just like moving mountains into forests, into moonlight, and juxtaposing images. So I'll look at him a lot when I have a panel is maybe a problem panel, and I just have some space that I just need to make interesting looking. But maybe I've done too many detailed backgrounds, and I don't want to overwhelm the reader with too much. I think it was like Sean Murphy years ago. He had a video where he just said like you need to pace your reader as well, give them a breather every now and then. Like not every panel can be like, you know, crazy detail. So yeah, Mignola, I have like a stack of comics near my table at all times just to rifle through. But yeah, photo reference was huge for the first chapter of Red Koi just because I had, this castle, this interior castle to draw, and there were so many different options. Like the Japanese, I'll say, especially at that time, were so good about weaving nature into their natural structures, but in a way that still is that like beautiful order. So I did try to bring in some of that stuff.
Yeah, that's that's interesting. I feel like you can go couple different ways, and there's photo reference, and obviously there's referencing comic books. And I think if you just stick to one, it's almost like you can tell. If you're just using photo ref or you're just using comic book reference, it's just like, oh, okay, I can see that. But I think mixing and matching is really where you start to get a different look than everybody else.
Well, especially referencing comic books when I'm trying to like troubleshoot an art problem, and photo reference when I'm looking at, say this giant armored creature that should not be able to wear samurai armor, but I'm like, okay, what would be the mechanism that I'd have to fudge in order to allow this to work?
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm definitely big on books, internet for those things, and then it's almost like, you know, calling in your teammates when you can reference an old, Art Adams Creature from the Black Lagoon comic for some.
Yeah. Do you, like, as a writer artist, do you shy away from things that have similar flavor? Like, I know that when I'm in the middle of laying out a Horace story or something, if I see something on Netflix or even an image somewhere that like could even be remotely like similar to what I'm doing, I'm like, skip. I don't look at it. I don't watch it.
Yeah.
Some people like dive right into it and are like, well, I have to watch this TV show to make sure I'm not. I'm like, listen, if I didn't watch it, I didn't steal it. that's how I look at it. And plus, it might ruin something. So, what is your take on that?
Yeah, no, I do that now. There were some samurai video games or that had come out early, like a couple years ago, where I saw them and I was like, I watched a couple of like walkthrough videos, and I was like, I can't do this because I'm just gonna get sucked in. and my story is going to become this thing.
Yeah.
And so it was just like I needed to just get away from it. So now I turn this stuff off or try to like move away, or I'll try to find inspiration from other things. Prose is definitely helpful, just because you're not sealing an image. But yeah, that I think it can take you out of your own story and put your character into this other story, and then that's going to come through on the page.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I always try to go back to the source, whatever the source may be. You know, I listen to like old Shadow radio shows sometimes,
sweet.
or like I'm totally blanking on the series of books. The Bronze Doctor. I'm sure Dr. Mask knows. What is his name? The
Doctor Who.
Pulp. He's the pulp guy. He's got his two buddies, like anyway, I don't know. Anyway, old pulp stuff. So like stuff that it would have been like inspired like Lucas for Indiana Jones.
Yeah. Okay, yeah.
I'm not gonna watch Indiana Jones, but I'll check out the old pulp serials or something like that.
Yeah, giving yourself parameters, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry. Dr. Mask, when you have to start using arrows to show which panel to go to, you might be overdoing it.
This is true.
Yes, I just read a comic book the other night that had arrows, and it's funny because first of all, I saw the arrows, and I'm like, all right, I'm not an idiot. I don't need arrows. And then I thought, and then I'm like, those arrows helped because I wasn't 100% which order they had to go through. And Captain Goodnight, you both drew awesome library rooms. What are your inspiration references? Doc Savage, I knew you would know, Dr. Mask. What were your inspiration references? Which king has the better library, Swan King or King Elam?
I don't know how cool my answer is going to be, but a big inspiration for the Swan King was Beauty and the Beast. Because I have little kids, and so I'm rewatching all these movies now, and it's a beautiful movie. It's a good story, but that sort of Baroque, ornate castle and that library that he gives to Belle, as a gift. I loved the idea of these impossibly high walls stacked with books, and I knew I wanted that scene for the Swan King, that he's a scholar as well as a warrior, and so he's going to have just this absurd library of tomes that you're like, are you ever really going to go for the book on the 65th shelf all the way in the middle? And it's like, maybe, who knows?
It's the Hardy Boys up there. He keeps like I mean, I'm obsessed with libraries and books. I mean, unfortunately, and I don't know if you ran into this as well, the story comes first. For me, it's like, okay, we have the book bug and we have these giant libraries and there's a million books. It's going to be really cool. And then I start to draw the books and I'm like, what have I done? Yeah. And it has been insane. Up until issue 3, I'm still drawing books to some degree. And I'm like, holy cow, I love books, but I don't know what I was getting myself into, honestly.
Yeah. Like, why did I do this to myself?
Did you have that sensation, or
I have that when I'm drawing all the little spines, and then I have to find a way just to make them look a little bit different. Talk about movies that you find inspiring. Have you've seen The Ninth Gate?
It's one of my favorite movies.
It's a great movie, and it's based on a really good book. But I love that movie because I love books, and I'm like, oh, a book detective story. This is the greatest thing. But you get to look at all these beautiful old leather books, and there's the old twins, and their whole job is just to take care of and manage books. And I could watch this movie, or be around this world. Hopefully, not sell my soul to Satan, but just be around the book part of it, forever.
I watched that movie every year, and I've watched it since it came out. I saw it in the theater. It is one of my absolute favorite movies of all time. It's not, I don't want to go off on this, how much I love The Ninth Gate.
Your podcast.
It's like the color scheme of the movie,
Mm-hmm.
the acting, and yeah, Johnny Depp was a little young, but he was still fantastic in
Yep.
this. I love that whole the soundtrack is incredible, and the idea of a book detective is just the coolest thing.
Yep.
A puzzle between books and the illustrations. I mean, come on.
It's so like it's so funny because like even the scene where he's doing the research in the New York Public Library, just doing the reference of I love the idea that he's researching a demonic text and he can find reference in the stacks of the New York Public Library. And I'm just like, there's something about that kind of thing. And then all the European travel and the fact
Yeah.
that there's this whole cabal of like book people and I don't know. I'm totally with you.
Oh man. Yeah, I think we're gonna have to have an episode just on the Ninth Gate, but
We probably should. We should probably watch it again first though, and then like come back.
Yeah, I don't know. What else? I kind of covered a lot here. It's been 45 minutes. Anything else you want to talk to? Like, obviously, there's a new campaign. Currently, is the pre-launch.
Yep. Yeah, I think it's for the spring campaign. I think it's spring technically. And Red Koi issue 7 will be on there. And so Red Koi 7 continues from where Red Koi 6 left off. We have the conclusion of the Swan King story. So I put out a video the other day. I've had some readers over the years say like, hey, could you do a Swan King series? I have all my books here. I just keep pulling them out. Could you do a Swan King series? And it's like, well, I can't do 2 series at once, but Red Koi 6 sort of served as a quasi sequel to the Swan King one shot. And then the Swan King will finish his story in Red Koi 7 about what brought him from his castle out onto the Carrion Road. And then we'll be introduced to these 2 monstrous creatures, who are agents of Lord Kitagawa, and kind of continue the story on from there with Aiko and the Swan King, traveling together.
So the 2 new characters, just visually, I mean, did that just like blow up a whole history for each of those? Are you gonna like?
Yeah, there's a secret behind there that I'm hopefully going to get to reveal in Red Koi 8. But yeah, there's definitely a history there that I think readers are going to really enjoy.
Yeah, I think for me at least, I mean, and obviously you're a writer artist as well. There's just really a unique interplay between the writing and the drawing, and it's a bounce back and forth. And sometimes I'm just starting with shapes and this carve out this character. He looks a little interesting. That jumps me into the story. And then I write some more story. And I don't want to say it's easy, but I find it really a lot easier than if I just had to sit down and just write a story without any like visual start to like
like anchor your imagination. Like you can take this thing and like I think this would be kind of like there's a flashback battle that I thought of. I don't know if I was writing or if I was what I was doing, but it's a scene of a battle that took place between the Swan King's grandfather and another, rival king. And it's going to be like a brutal duel. But I was like, oh man, I need to. So I just grabbed the sketchbook, draw loosely the most pivotal scene, some like real gruesome pivotal moment, and then just give myself a little reference notes. I'm like, boom, that's going to be in, another issue soon.
Yeah. What do you do for like Easter eggs? I don't know how many Easter eggs you have. I have actually realized that I've put Easter eggs in that I don't remember. And I'm like, I gotta write these down somewhere. If not, I'm just like, I'm putting these fun little things and I'm not even gonna let them know what they are, let alone other people.
I and I don't think I've ever consciously put an Easter egg in, but I've gone back and looked and been like, what's this for? Oh, this is for that later on, you know? So it's like the mind is kind of always working in a different way.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I, uh, I can't think of anything that I've intentionally put down.
I was just curious. Like I always imagine Rob, and I just don't know how he
Yeah,
manages
yeah.
to hold all that study. Let's see. Dr. Mask had a question. How far are you guys ahead on your series as far as planning of it? You first.
I am working on drawing issue 8, and I think I'm writing issue 10 right now. So
Do you write first the whole thing, and then do you jump into
yeah,
drawing?
I'll write it out, and then I'll do my thumbnails, and then I'll usually edit my thumbnails as I draw. So like my thumbnails are over there, and I was working on a page the other day, and I looked up at the thumbnail and I was like, no, no, that's boring. I gotta fix it. So I'll go back to my script, kind of read it a few times, see what it jogs in my mind, and then I'll put something different on the page. But usually it's kind of editing as I go. But I need the script just to kind of give me the idea of how far I'm gonna get.
Do you usually struggle with condensing the story in the amount of pages or condensing?
Condensing. It's like I don't know. I don't. Most of my books, I think, hit the maximum, except for maybe the second issue. That was a little lighter. But other than that, they tend to all kind of. I think it's 28 pages is our max.
Yeah.
And mine kind of keep hitting that 28-page mark hard. So. I don't know.
Yeah, same. As far as for Horace, Dr. Mask 3 is done. I have 4 written, thumbnailed out, so I'll be starting that over the next couple of weeks after I finish up my Horace H. Hoover mini, which I will be posting for people to download and print out, hopefully, if anybody has a 3D printer out there. And then 5 is, I have an outline for it and some thumbnails, some ideas for 5, but it's not fully written yet. But I'm very excited about issue 5, which is sometimes that's a good place to be. Like you're excited about multiple issues in the future, but then again, it's like that's still 2 issues away before I get to draw this crazy thing that I just came up with.
Yeah, that's the hard part.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything else? I don't know. I think we're good.
Yeah.
Almost here in an hour. I appreciate you chatting for a bit. We should do this more often. I like the writing and drawing. I could talk about it endlessly.
Yeah, same, man. I'd love to.
And thanks everybody for hanging out in the chat. Dr. Mask, Captain Goodnight, Blue Teddy Narrations, Blake, Jefferson Roswell. Yeah, maybe we'll do this more often and just pick a topic and just have a chat.
Yeah, you do have a question at the.
Oh, I do.
Goodnight.
Congrats on finishing HH3. Will it be on the Alterna August campaign? It's not the most recent campaign, so I don't know. As I can, like you said, is that summer?
Now. Yeah, I think it's the spring campaign.
Spring.
So it won't. But do you have a link?
That's good. You're on the ball. I don't. Do you want to throw it in there? No, I probably can't. Pre-orders. All right, you chat while I find something.
All right, I will.
You can talk about your favorite comic and why it's Horace H. Hoover.
That's right. That's a good idea. I don't know if I have a favorite comic right now. I just feel like I always tend to go back to the stuff that I am always rereading, the Hellboy stuff and, the kind of classic. I'm a huge Tim Sale fan. And Tim Sale, that was another one. So great artist. Tim Sale broke my brain when I first saw his stuff because he merged the cartoony with the real, but just with this classical kind of stuff. I don't know what the right reference word is, but I love Tim Sale's stuff, and I'm very sad when he.
I can see that. Yeah, I can definitely see that in your work. I mean, when I think of my all-time favorite artist, I mean, David Mazzucchelli, you know, Year One, his Daredevil stuff is just, it's stuff that I would totally put on my wall. Nobody would even know it's a comic book unless you told them. But I do, yeah, I go through different phases for sure. I'm going back and reading some very, very, very old comics I haven't read in like 20 years because I'm cataloging all of my old comics. And it's interesting because sometimes like I want to make sure that I'm sort of reaching the height, and I will never reach it, but of my ideal, right? Which is sort of like mid 80s stuff. Then I'll go back and I'll read some of those comic books. I'm like, this is just incredible storytelling. It's lots of panels, but still descriptive, you know, all that kind of stuff. And then I'll read an old comic and I'm like, that was tough. That was less than stellar. So it's funny because I'll pull out the ones that I consider now to be, you know, like something to shoot for. But I think for me, as each issue goes on, I think I'm getting closer to it, to what I'm trying to achieve. But
yeah, same. If you look at issue 1 versus issue 6 or upcoming issue 7, I mean, there's definitely a change in the art, hopefully for the better. But it's like also like I've talked to so many like young artists at shows and stuff where they're like, I'm trying to find my style, and it's like, I don't know if I ever had that sense that I'm trying to find my style. I think there was always like, I hope I find my style, my way of drawing, but I knew I couldn't force it. So it was like, I just kept trying to be different people until one day it's kind of like laid out, you know, on the page. I was like, oh, well, this is like, I can kind of see this influence here, but that's not quite him. And I can see this influence here, but it's not quite him. And it's kind of actually starting to happen, which is very exciting. So.
Yeah, at a certain point, it's like, oh, that's how I draw trees.
Yeah,
it wasn't intentional. It just, I've drawn like in issue 3, there are caves and caves and caves and caves and rocks. And up until issue 3, I had drawn a cave occasionally and a rock occasionally.
Sure.
But what I actually stopped drawing the comic book, I spent like 2 weeks just looking at photos of rocks and caves and drawing. So I actually came up with like my comic version of rocks and caves, and then that got incorporated into the comic. And I'm like, I know in the future for the rest of my entire life, that is how I will draw rocks, and that is how I will draw caves, you know? So yeah, it just happens. I think somebody else had a question. Sorry. Ed Danzig, sorry to get in late. Are there any plans for collected editions, trade paperbacks?
Not that I have. Pete might have a desire to do another Alterna Giant. And if so, I would be happy to collect the second part of the story into a giant and add maybe another short story in there just for readers who already have the issues will want something new, but that's not something that I'm aware of as planned out now.
Giants are nice because I like to have like the single issues that I can bag and board and then have a giant just to flip through.
They're great at shows.
I am so particular about my comics. I hate to
cringe if you saw my comics.
Not even just my comics, my books. If you looked at every book I own, this is not hyperbole, there's not one broken spine on any book I have ever read in my entire life. This like
have you read any of them? I mean, be honest.
All right, yeah, that's my it's crazy. It's pretty crazy.
How do you read? Do you always like? Are you always
like? Yeah, I'm like popping it out. And if like, not that I've ever broken a spine, but I've dropped books before, and like the cover, I'm like, I need to replace that book. I
Oh my
might
God.
I might be OCD,
No,
but I don't
not
know.
you.
I like books.
I
Let's
do
see,
too.
Jefferson Roswell. Tyler, where do you find your influence on your anthropomorphic characters? Stan Sakai.
I love Stan Sakai. But Stan Sakai is more cartoony than I have a desire to draw, and I've got like I know I don't have my bearings right here. I can't remember which. I don't know. Over there somewhere is like a whole bunch of Usagi Yojimbo trades. Not one with a broken spine because I took care of. But no, it's definitely more of like early Turtles stuff. Yeah, maybe more of like a Hellboy influences kind of things, and definitely um, some of that early Spawn stuff where you just have like I loved the character Cygor, just this cybernetic gorilla, half robot. When I first saw that character, I was like, this is the coolest thing that I've ever seen. Um, but while I have a ton of love for Stan Sakai and what he does, yeah, I wouldn't say he's I would be able to do what he does.
I have to admit, I don't know if I have any Mouse Guard, I guess. I have Mouse Guard.
Mouse Guard is good.
That was cool, but I don't really think that's not something I gravitate towards usually.
I never did either, but I think I read about Hellboy in the same Wizard issue that I did about Usagi Yojimbo because they were both Dark Horse titles and the Goon, and I got on all three of those, and I never really cared for anthropomorphic stuff aside from like the Turtles, but Usagi was great because Stan Sakai is deeply steeped in Japanese history, and so you can read. He's got cool supernatural stories too, but like you learn something. You
Yeah.
know, so he's a machine. This guy, he can draw, he can ink, he can letter, and so his stuff is definitely fun to check out. I didn't expect to like it as much as I did.
Yeah, Pride of Baghdad. Is that it?
Oh
Yeah,
gosh,
the Brian K. Vaughan one. I
that
think
is brutal.
I was just kind of like scanning my graphic novels, which I don't really revisit very often. But yeah, that was a great book.
Yeah, that's a rough one, but very good.
All right. Does anybody have any other questions? I kept you a little longer. We're here at an hour though.
Oh, good.
All right. Well, thanks again, everybody. The link for the pre-launch is in the chat. I will update the YouTube links if they're not up there, but as soon as this is over, I'll post those in there as well. Thanks again, everybody. Thank you, Tyler, and have a good evening, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, man.
Bye.